success of nominating his close confidant, Sergio Moore, as not only the American ambassador in India, but to also be the special envoy of America in South Asia and Central Asian republics. So God is already here telling he is not to take over his assignment, main assignment as the American ambassador immediately, but he is here to actually go to the Central Asian republics. So once he goes to the field town of Central Asian republics, it will strike him how important for their prosperity and for the role of America and Central Asian republic is the stability in Afghanistan. And he is likely to recommend directly to his boss, President Trump, that what Trump had been harping since March 2025 that America wants Bagram Air Base, he should stop talking about that. In any case, he's not getting that at all. We have seen recently at the Moscow Forum consultation on Afghanistan in Moscow, a joint statement was signed by the Taliban, Russia, China, Pakistan, and India, very categorically stating that no outside military infrastructure should come to Afghanistan. So this will not happen. He should advise his boss, President Trump. And he should also advise to President Trump that $9 billion of the Afghan assets which have been unilaterally frozen by the Americans that need to be released. Now, as far as the other great power, Russia, is concerned, Russia is the only country and only great power in the world today to have given full recognition to the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, and there are two key reasons for that. The first, of course, is that for Russia, Central Asian republics are very important and they understand Afghanistan's role in Central Asian republics. And the second is that the Russians have decided now to focus east as far as the foreign policy is concerned, and therefore, in 2024, when President Putin came out with his Eurasian security architecture, he understands fully well, and the Russians know, that Afghanistan will be very important for the success of this Eurasian security architecture. Coming to the third part, which is China, both China and Pakistan, they are moving towards normalization of relations with the Taliban. And in August 2025, there was this Pakistan, China, Afghanistan trilateral dialogue where once again the need to take the CPEC from Pakistan to Afghanistan was discussed. Also discussed were the need for deep trade, transit and development of the region. So all these things, so all the three great powers have great winners in Afghanistan. And the only country who was standing out, not showing much interest, was India. After this visit of Kentucky, now India also has come up on board and in the open after having upgraded the ties with Afghanistan. Therefore, the question now is, what is to be done next in Afghanistan? So the next thing is that Afghanistan had applied in 2015 for full membership of the SCO. Now that should be put back on the table. Now what is coming in the way of the full membership of Afghanistan are the United Nations sanctions. Sanctions basically means that the member countries, they have three main issues with the Taliban government that need to be addressed urgently. The first is the treatment of women by the Taliban regime. The second is the need for an inclusive government in Afghanistan, which is not there right now. And the third is the need for the Taliban regime to ensure that its soil is not used by extremist groups and terrorists. Where the third issue already Kentucky has said very clearly the position of the regime on that issue in Delhi. Now, hypothetically speaking, if this was to happen fast, then they get full membership. So, what would be the consequence of that? It is very simple. That as far as the Taliban regime is concerned, which is here to stay, it will be more obliged. It will be under legal obligation to ensure that its territory is not used by terrorists for any activities in neighboring states. And what the Taliban will get in return is when it gets the membership of SEO, we know that recently SEO itself had a major transformation when the SEO summit was held in China on September 1st, where two big decisions were taken. The first was that, like the BRICS Bank, SEO will also have a bank of its own, and the 10-year development plan or development strategy is to be outlined. So think of it, the benefit that it will give to the Taliban regime, which has now said openly that its focus is the economic trajectory of Taliban, that they are looking for prosperity and they are looking for development. It helps them. So therefore, with India now on board, this is the right time, and this will make a lot of difference. So in the midterm, and the two parts, especially China and Russia, are looking at the possibility of full membership for SEO. The SEO Afghanistan contact group needs to now hasten up or to charge its activities. Now, this group was formed in 2005 and its last meeting was held in September 2025, which is 1 month before the Mutaki's visit to India, and where they discussed all the issues concerning security, stability, and the functioning of this contact group so that it worked more closely with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. So the point to make is that if everything goes well and all the players realize the importance of stability in Afghanistan, a big deal would have been accomplished, and that is what the region needs, and South Asia needs that.
अब देख रहे हैं टूलबेस वेब और मेरे साथ इस हफ्ते मेहमान है सुशांत शरीफ और बात होगी अफगानिस्तान और भारत की तालिबान 2.2 है वहां पर उसके फॉरेन मिनिस्टर अब हिंदुस्तान आए हैं तो इसे लेकर बहुत चर्चा है कि इस वक्त उनके हिंदुस्तान आने क्या सिग्निफिकेंस है क्या मैसेज आ रहा है इससे
भारत और तालिबान के बीच में मैं अफगानिस्तान जाने के लिए बोल रहा हूँ क्योंकि औपचारिक तौर पर हमने उनको अभी तक मान्यता नहीं दी।
सवाल ये है कि औपचारिक तौर पर क्या मान्यता मिल जाएगी अगर वो आते हैं।
पाकिस्तान क्या करता है? पाकिस्तान करता है वहाँ पर जो मौत का सौदागर वाला काम है, पाकिस्तान का वो काम रहा है और जिसने अफगानिस्तान को टेररिस्ट कर दिया तो ऑब्वियसली भारत के लिए गुडविल है। आपको याद है जब वाजपेयी जी लाहौर गए थे बस यात्रा तो वहाँ पर उन्होंने स्पीच दी जहाँ पर उन्होंने ये कहा था कि मुझे लोग कहते हैं कि मैं बिना पाकिस्तान की हूँ या मैंने पाकिस्तान के ऊपर अपनी गोली लगा दी।
आप देख रहे हैं गोल में
a lot of times pass since the last attack took place, and the world as we knew has changed. Politics, trade, markets, planet, everything has changed. Peace is stopping status quo and wars are becoming the new normal. The world has stopped worrying about me.
In 334 BC, Alexander, king of Macedonia, began one of the greatest military campaigns in history against the superpower of the age, the Persian Empire. Just 20 years old, his brilliant and fearless leadership won him battle after battle. And in an astonishing 10-year campaign that took him to the edge of the known world, he carved out one of the largest empires ever known. Few men have had such a massive impact on the course of history. To the Persians, he was Alexander the Accursed, but to the West, he was immortalized as Alexander the Great. This rugged land was the scene of remarkable developments in art, philosophy, and warfare. Its two greatest city-states were Athens, a naval power where democracy, art, drama, and philosophy flourished, and Sparta, an austere militaristic society famed for its formidable army. In 480 BC, these two city-states had joined forces to fight an invasion by the mighty Persian Empire. At the narrow pass of the Vajrasana, a small Greek force led by 300 Spartans held up the enormous Persian army for 3 days before they were finally encircled and killed. Then, in the Straits of Salamis, the Greek fleet defeated the Persian navy. But they couldn't prevent the Persians burning the sacred temples of the Athenian Acropolis. The next year at Plataea, the Greeks won a decisive land battle against the Persians and forced them to abandon their invasion. The next 50 years were the golden age of classical Greece. But rising tension between Athens and Sparta and their allies eventually led to war, dragging the Greek world into decades of destructive fighting. Wars between the Greek city-states continued for almost a century, leaving them exhausted and vulnerable to a new rising power to the north. For centuries, sophisticated Greeks have viewed the mountainous kingdom of Macedonia as a backwater, extant, barely Greek at all. But under King Philip II, Macedonia emerged as a formidable military force. His most famous reform, the introduction of the sarissa, an 18-foot pike, twice the length of a normal Greek spear, and wielded by trained infantry fighting in close formation, known as a phalanx. In 338 BC, at the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip's army crushed the joint forces of Thebes and Athens. Through alliance and conquest, Philip had already gained control over most of his neighbors. Now, following this victory, he united all Greece in an alliance known as the Hellenic League, or League of Corinth, with Philip as hegemon, or supreme commander. Only Sparta stood aside. Philip began to plan a great campaign, a pan-Hellenic or all-Greek war against the Persian Empire. Their old foe was now an alien superpower, its great riches ripe for the taking. But on the eve of launching his war, Philip was assassinated by his own bodyguard, victim of Macedonia's brutal court rivalries. He was succeeded by his 20-year-old son, Alexander, brilliant, restless, tutored by the great philosopher Aristotle, and already an experienced military commander. Alexander inherited his father's grand plan to invade Persia, but first he had to secure his own position as king. At home he had potential rivals executed, then crushed rebellions in Illyria, Thessaly, and central Greece. He made a special example of Thebes, completely destroying the ancient city and selling its people into slavery. In the spring of 334 BC, now ready to launch his war against the Persian Empire, Alexander led his army across the Hellespont into Asia Minor. It was the start of one of the greatest military campaigns in history. Alexander's army was about 40,000 strong, drawn from all parts of Greece. The infantry were commanded by the veteran Macedonian general Parmenion. In the front rank, 9,000 Macedonian phalangites were armed with the 18-foot sarissa. These were professional soldiers, well trained and drilled, formed up for battle in the phalanx, 16 ranks deep. This packed formation presented a solid wall of iron spear tips and was virtually unstoppable. But it was also difficult to maneuver and highly vulnerable to attacks on its flanks or rear. So 3,000 elite infantry, bypassists or shield bearers, armed with shorter spears, guarded its flanks. They were commanded by Parmenion's son, Nicanor. The second line of Alexander's army was made up of 7,000 Greek allies and 5,000 mercenaries, armed as hoplites. They took their name from the hoplon, their large round shield, and carried shorter 8-foot spears. A hoplite phalanx was not as effective as the Macedonian phalangites, but still well armed and heavily armored for the time. The Agrianes were the army's elite skirmishers, expert javelin throwers for what's now southern Bulgaria. Other skirmishers from Thrace and Illyria were armed with javelins, slings, and bows. The shock troops of Alexander's army were the companion cavalry, 1,800 elite horsemen, armed with spear and sword, commanded by Philotas, another son of Parmenion. Alexander led the royal squadron in person. There were also 1,800 cavalry from Thessaly, commanded by Callas, 600 from other parts of Greece, led by Erygius, and 900 mounted scouts from Thrace and Paeonia under Cassander. The great Persian Empire was divided into provinces, called satrapies. Each satrapy was ruled by a governor, or satrap. Those in Asia Minor, now threatened by Alexander's invasion, met to discuss strategy. Memnon of Rhodes, a skilled Greek general in Persian service, urged them to avoid battle with Alexander. Instead, he advised them to use a scorched earth strategy, to burn villages and crops and withdraw to the interior. Alexander's army promised to quickly starve. It was good advice, but the satraps were unwilling to lay waste to their own provinces without a fight. So they decided to face Alexander's army at the river Granicus. The Persian army formed up behind the river, which was shallow but 60 feet wide with steep banks. Their front line was a wall of cavalry, about 10,000 horsemen from across the empire. These are Tarkanians from modern Iran, Bactrians from Afghanistan, and Paphlagonians from Turkey's Black Sea coast. Behind, in reserve, were the infantry, several thousand Greek mercenaries, a common sight in Persian armies at this time. These men fought for Persian gold and were armed with the round shield and short spear of hoplites. The Persians may have been unsure if they could trust these men in combat against fellow Greeks, and so placed them at the rear. Alexander, determined to attack and destroy this Persian force before it could retreat, raced to the Granicus with his best troops. On his left wing he posted Thessalia, Greek and Thracian cavalry under Parmenian's command. In the center were the massed spears of the phalanx, in 6 divisions commanded by Perdiccas, Koinos, Amyntas, Philip, Meleager, and Craterus. On the right, Alexander himself, with the companion cavalry under Philotas, as well as the elite Hypaspists, the Agrianes javelin throwers, and the archers. Alexander, with 13,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry in all, was probably slightly outnumbered. But ignoring advice to wait until dawn to cross the river, he ordered an immediate assault. He sent a squadron of companion cavalry to ford the river, followed by a regiment of Hypaspists and the Paeonian light cavalry. Alexander, calling on his men to show their courage, then led his right wing across the river. As they reached the middle of the river, the Greeks came under a hail of javelins, darts, and arrows from the Persian line. Those that made it to the far bank were immediately charged by the Persian cavalry. Alexander was in the thick of the fighting. He attacked where the whole mass of their cavalry leaders were stationed. Around him, desperate conflict raged. Horses were jammed against horses, and men against men. The Macedonians striving to drive the Persians away from the river bank. The Persians determined to prevent them crossing, and to push them back into the river. Alexander's attack seemed reckless, but he was buying time for the rest of his army to cross the river, including the irresistible Macedonian phalanx. Then, suddenly, Alexander was fighting for his life, charged by 2 Persian nobles. Roisaces rode up to Alexander and struck him on the head with his sword, breaking off a piece of his helmet. But the helmet broke the force of the blow, and Alexander struck him down with his lance. Then, from behind, Mithridates raised his sword against the king, but Blackcletus, son of Drunkenness, anticipated his blow, struck his arm, and cut it off, sword and all. Now the Greek army was across the river. The Persian cavalry faced a wall of Macedonian spears. Most turned and fled. The speed and shock of Alexander's attack meant Persia's Greek mercenaries hadn't even had time to join the battle. Alexander, in a blood rage, or possibly regarding these Greeks as traitors, ignored their appeals for mercy. The mercenaries were surrounded on all sides and massacred. Alexander had won a great victory. Asia Minor now lay at his mercy. But the Persian Empire was still a land of immense wealth and power. Already, it was mobilizing its vast resources to face him. If Alexander was to conquer this empire and take his place in history, he'd next have to face Darius, King of Kings himself. Research and artwork in this video comes from Osprey Publishing's extensive range of books on ancient history. Every Osprey book examines a particular battle, campaign, or combat unit in authoritative, meticulous detail. And with more than 3,000 titles, they cover everything from ancient warfare to modern conflict. Visit their website to see their online catalogue. Huge thanks to the YouTube channel Invicta for their help in making this series. You can find out more about the remarkable life of Alexander the Great in their Moments in History series. If you'd like to help more history videos, please visit our Patreon page. In 334 BC, Alexander, the 21-year-old king of Macedonia, led a coalition of Greek forces against the greatest power of the age, the Persian Empire. He led an army of skilled veterans, at its heart, men of the Macedonian phalanx, armed with the 18-foot Sarissa pike, and the elite horsemen of his companion cavalry. Together at the Battle of the River Granicus, they won a first decisive victory over the Persian army. Now, as Alexander approached Sardis, capital of the Persian province of Lydia, its commander surrendered without a fight. But before Alexander could advance further, he needed to neutralize Persian naval power. Persia had a powerful fleet with major naval bases around the eastern Mediterranean that could potentially cut his lines of communication back to Greece. Rather than challenge the Persians at sea, Alexander decided to attack its nearest bases, the Greek coastal cities of Miletus and Halicarnassus. Both put up determined resistance, but were taken by winter. Following spring of 333 BC, Alexander continued his advance into Lycia and Phrygia. At Gordium, he was shown the legendary Gordian knot. A prophecy said that whoever could unpick it would rule all Asia. Alexander simply took his sword and sliced it in half. Meanwhile, Memnon of Rhodes, a skilled Greek general in Persian service, led Persian warships into the Aegean and captured the islands of Chios and Lesbos. But after Memnon's sudden death from illness, the offensive was abandoned. Had passed since Alexander's army crossed the Hellespont and invaded the Persian Empire. Now Alexander led his men into Cilicia and was soon poised to cross the Lower Mountains into Syria. But then the main Persian army, led by King Darius III himself, emerged behind the Greek army to the north. Darius was determined to trap and destroy Alexander's army, which he outnumbered almost 2-1. So he blocked Alexander's only escape route by moving his army to the coastal plain near Issus, just 6 miles wide, from mountains to sea. The narrow battlefield would force Alexander to fight, but it also prevented Darius exploiting his huge numerical advantage. His army, by some estimates, was up to 100,000 strong and contained some of the finest soldiers in his vast empire, including 10,000 of his own household troops, known as the Immortals. His best cavalry were massed on his right towards the sea, where the ground was better for horses. His best infantry, his Greek mercenary hoplites, formed the center. Persian infantry formed his left wing. Alexander deployed his own army for battle, once again entrusting his left wing nearest the sea to Parmenion, with the Greek cavalry and infantry. In the center, as always, was the Macedonian phalanx. Alexander positioned himself and his best troops on the right wing toward the mountain slopes. His elite Adriani javelin throwers, his archers, the behind them the pacifists, and the companion cavalry. When Alexander saw the strength of the Persian cavalry facing Armenia on the left, he moved across his Thessalian cavalry to reinforce him. Despite his overwhelming numbers, Darius held his position behind a small river, the Benares, and waited for Alexander to attack. He didn't have to wait long. Alexander called out to his men, urging them to fight bravely, picking out some by name. Then, at the head of his army's right wing, he charged. Once again, the speed and shock of the Macedonian advance sent the enemy reeling back. But in the center of the battlefield, the Macedonian phalanx was in trouble. In its effort to keep up with Alexander, its formation had become disordered. Now, in fierce fighting with Darius's Greek mercenaries, the phalanx was slowly being driven back. Alexander, seeing the danger, regrouped, led the companions in a headlong charge straight at the Persian center. The Greek mercenaries threatened on their flank were soon in disarray. The Macedonian phalanx was able to resume its advance. Alexander fought his way towards the great king, Darius himself. Rather than face this apparently mad and fearless Macedonian king, Darius fled the battlefield in his royal chariot. Meanwhile, the Macedonian left wing under Armenia was in a desperate fight against the best of the Persian cavalry. If the Persians could break through here, they could envelop Alexander's army and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. But Armenia and his troops fought doggedly and continued to hold the Persians at bay. As the news that Darius had fled spread among his troops, they abandoned the fight and tried to save themselves. The battle turned into a massacre. Ptolemy, one of the Macedonian commanders, told Alexander there were so many Persian dead, his men had used them to fill a deep ravine so they could cross over it. The Battle of Issus was a stunning victory for Alexander. And amongst the spoils of victory were Darius' wife, mother, and 3 children, all taken alive and well treated by Alexander. With the Persian field army in retreat, Alexander now turned to subduing the western territories of the Persian Empire. The next year, 332, the coastal cities of Phoenicia submitted to Alexander, ending Persian naval power in the Mediterranean. But the island city of Tyre resisted. Tyre's defenders fought bravely and skillfully, even when Alexander began building a causeway to the island, protected by 2 giant siege towers, which they counterattacked with fire ships. But after 7 months, the city walls were breached, and Tyre fell. Most of its citizens were killed or enslaved. Gaza, too, was taken by siege. Alexander continued to Pelusium on the Nile Delta, where the Persian governor of Egypt surrendered the entire province to Alexander, along with the royal treasury. At Memphis, priests of this ancient land welcomed Alexander as their liberator from Persian rule and crowned him pharaoh. At the mouth of the Nile, he founded a new city, Alexandria. Then travelled to the desert oracle of Siwa, where, according to some accounts, the priests welcomed him as son of Alu, king of the gods. Alexander returned east to Tyre, where in 331 BC he received news of trouble back home. Despite his great victories over the Persians, many Greeks regarded Alexander as a tyrant. King Agis of Sparta, with Persian support, now launched a revolt against Macedonia. Antipater, Alexander's commander in Greece, was already dealing with rebellion in Thrace. But he quickly marched south and met Agis in battle near the city of Megalopolis. Even the legendary Spartans were now no match for Macedonian military power. The Spartan army was crushed. King Agis himself was among the fallen. With his base in Greece secure once more, Alexander advanced towards the Persian heartlands, seeking a final showdown with Darius. He received a letter from the Persian king offering him a fortune in gold, his daughter in marriage, and half his empire in exchange for peace. But Alexander's stunning victories, all the oracles and acclamations, had now convinced him that his destiny was to rule the world. He rejected the Persian king's offer. He didn't want half the empire. He was coming to take it all. Research and artwork for this video comes from Osprey Publishing's extensive range of books on ancient history. Every Osprey book examines a particular battle, campaign, or combat unit in authoritative or meticulous detail. At more than 3,000 titles, they cover everything from ancient warfare to modern conflict. Visit their website to see their online catalogue. If you'd like to help us make more history videos, please visit our Patreon page. Huge thanks to Invicta for their help in making this series. You can find out more about the remarkable life of Alexander the Great in their Moments in History series. In 334 BC, Alexander, 21-year-old ruler of the small Greek kingdom of Macedonia, led an invasion of the vast Persian Empire. It seemed impossible odds, but thanks to Greek military dominance and Alexander's fearless leadership, he won two great battles against the Persians, at the river Granicus and at Issus. Having subdued Persian lands west of the Euphrates River, he now headed east into the empire's heartlands, seeking a final showdown with the Persian king, Darius III. Receiving news that a great Persian army led by Darius had assembled at Gabamela, near modern Mosul in Iraq, he made straight for it. This was Darius' last chance to stop Alexander, and Alexander's chance to smash Persian power once and for all. Darius fight on open ground, where his advantage in numbers would be more telling. His soldiers had also worked hard to clear and flatten the terrain, to make it suitable for Persian war chariots. By modern estimates, the Persian army was between 50 and 80,000 strong, made up of contingents from across the empire. Infantry from Syria and Babylonia, cavalry from Armenia, India, and Central Asia. Hundred-sized chariots, even a handful of war elephants. Alexander's army was smaller and may have been outnumbered by as much as 2 to 1. He deployed his units in their usual formation. On the left flank, Thracian and Thessalian cavalry, commanded by Romanian. In the centre, the Macedonian veterans of the phalanx, each armed with their 18-foot surface armor. On the right flank, Alexander with his elite cavalry, the companions, and his best infantry, the Hypaspists. These were the units with which Alexander planned to launch his main attack. Greek hoplites formed a second line and supported both wings, triangle back to guard against encirclement by the Persians. The battle began when Alexander led his wing out to the right, a move that took the Persians by surprise. Could Alexander really be trying to encircle their huge army? Persians heralded his movement, taking troops away from their centre to outflank Alexander and prevent him leaving the area they cleared to the Persian chariots. But Alexander's unusual maneuver was a trap to entice the Persians to weaken their centre. When he saw that it had worked, he ordered his Greek cavalry to charge to keep the Persians fixed in position. The giant cavalry battle developed on the right wing. Darius, meanwhile, judging this to be the decisive moment, unleashed his chariots. But expert Agrian's javelin throwers took out horses and mules, while the Greek infantry opened lanes, allowing the chariots to pass harmlessly through. Now Alexander led his companion cavalry advance the Macedonian phalanx in a headlong charge straight at the weakened Persian centre, fighting his way towards Darius himself. The sudden ferocity of Alexander's assault threw the Persians into panic. The centre of the army broke and ran. King Darius himself leading the rout. But Alexander's left wing was in serious trouble. Armenia, facing a huge onslaught by Persian cavalry, was virtually surrounded. Indian and Scythian horsemen had even ridden through a gap in the Greek line. And rather than wheeling and attacking the Greeks from behind, they carried straight on to lose their camp. Armenians sent a desperate appeal to Alexander for help. The king abandoned his pursuit of Darius, regrouped, and charged the Persian right wing. Fighting the battle, claiming the lives of 60 of Alexander's companions. Finally, as news of Darius' flight spread across the battlefield, the last Persian horseman turned and fled. The Battle of Gaugamela was a stunning and complete victory for Alexander. According to ancient sources, he lost just a few hundred men, while the Persians lost thousands. Alexander had routed Darius's great army, and now the road to Babylon, the empire's main capital, lay open. The Macedonian king entered the great city in triumph, recognized by Persian officials as its new rightful ruler. So too at the city of Susa, where Alexander ceremonially took his seat on the royal throne of Persia. In the Zagros Mountains, the pass known as the Persian Gates, a courageous Persian force held up Alexander's army for a month. The Greeks eventually found a mountain path that bypassed their position, allowing them to encircle and wipe out the defenders. In early 330 BC, Alexander reached Persepolis, the empire's ceremonial capital. Alexander wanted to appear as a liberator to the Persians, as a legitimate successor to King Darius. But now he ordered Persepolis to be pillaged and burnt. Retribution for the Persian invasion of Greece, and the burning of Athens' sacred temples in 480 BC. Alexander now headed north to Media, where Darius had taken refuge in the walled city of Ecbatana. Alexander was determined to capture Darius, but the fugitive king fled east in hope of raising a new army in the provinces of Parthia, Bactria, and Sogdia. It was not to be. As Alexander closed in, the Persian king was murdered by one of his own governors, Bessus, who then proclaimed himself the empire's new ruler. Alexander gave orders for Darius to be buried in the royal tombs of Persepolis, alongside his ancestors. Then he paused to organize his vast new empire. Alexander appointed viceroys to rule the provinces on his behalf, keeping 7 Persians who had sworn loyalty in their posts. Then he resumed his march east, his goal to find and kill the usurper Bessus, subjugate the empire's eastern provinces, and reach the far edge of the world. Research and artwork for this video comes from Osprey Publishing's extensive range of books on ancient history. Every Osprey book examines a particular battle, campaign, or combat unit in authoritative and meticulous detail. And with more than 3,000 titles, they cover everything from ancient warfare to modern conflict. Visit their website to see their online catalog. Thank you to all the Patreon supporters who made this video possible, and to the channel Invictor. Learn more about Alexander's incredible story in their Moments in History series. At the age of just 22, Alexander, ruler of the small Greek kingdom of Macedonia, had led an invasion of the vast Persian Empire. After a string of victories, he smashed Persian military power at the Battle of Gaugamela and took the Persian throne for himself. Now, in 330 BC, Alexander continued his march east. His goal, to find and kill Bessus, a Persian usurper claiming to be the rightful king. and to subjugate the empire's eastern provinces. Alexander headed first for Armenia, today part of Afghanistan, where the Persian governor Vajrasana had launched a revolt after initially pretending to submit to Alexander. The rebellion was crushed and Vajrasana is killed in single combat by a Greek cavalry officer. Nearby, Alexander founded the city of Alexandria, Haryana, modern Herat, one of around a dozen cities that Alexander would eventually found, almost all bearing his name. Alexander marched on to Frada. The Macedonian court had a long tradition of plots and assassination. 6 years before, Alexander's own father, King Philip, had been murdered by his bodyguard. He was now informed that Philotas, commander of his companion cavalry, had uncovered a plot to assassinate Alexander, but kept it secret. Philotas and his father Parmenion were among the most respected of Alexander's commanders, and had played crucial roles in all his great victories. But when Philotas confessed under torture, Alexander then sent assassins back into Ecbatana, Parmenion was governor, to kill him before he even heard of his son's death and had a chance to turn against Alexander. In 329, Alexander resumed his pursuit of Bessus. He founded the city of Alexandria Alakosia, modern Kandahar in southern Afghanistan. As he reached Kunduz, Bessus was betrayed by his own men and handed over in chains. Alexander sent him back to Persia for execution as a kingslayer. Alexander pushed on into modern Tajikistan, where the Sogdians rose up against him. He had to fight off attacks by local tribes, take several towns by assault. On the banks of the Jaxartes River, he founded the city of Alexandria Iskati, meaning Alexandria the furthest, so named because he had at last reached the limit of the Persian Empire. This frontier was frequently raided by nomads, known to the Greeks as Scythians. Alexander lured them into a decisive battle near the Jaxartes. The result was a crushing victory for the Macedonian king that put an end to the raids. The fighting against Bactrian and Sogdian tribes continued, frustrating Alexander and tying him down in a difficult guerrilla war. By now, many of the Macedonian troops were unhappy with Alexander. Most had not seen their homes in years, but their king seemed bent on conquest without end. What was worse, he began to adopt the rituals and dress of their defeated Persian enemy, customs they viewed as effeminate and decadent. At Marakanda, modern Samarkand, after a furious drunken argument, Alexander killed Clitus the Black. Clitus had been one of Alexander's best generals, the man who saved his life in the Battle of the Granicus. Alexander was full of remorse, but his growing arrogance was alienating more and more old comrades. When he tried to make his countrymen perform the traditional Persian ritual of proskynesis, prostrating themselves before the king, he crossed the line. another plot to assassinate Alexander was uncovered. This time the ringleader was a royal page, one of the sons of Macedonian nobility attending the king. Menelaus had become murderously bitter towards Alexander over a perceived injustice. He and his accomplices were tortured and then stoned to death. Callisthenes, Alexander's official historian, was also implicated in the conspiracy. He was thrown in prison, where he later died. That summer, in 327, according to legend, Alexander became captivated by the beauty of Roxana, daughter of a Bactrian lord. Their marriage was also a sound political move, helping to end a revolt against his rule, and allowing him to continue his advance into modern Pakistan and India. Alexander now prepared to subdue the Persian Empire's most eastern provinces, which had yet to recognize his kingship. To do so, he went into the Kush Mountains and reached the Indus River Valley. Advancing in two columns, his army won a series of skirmishes against the Aspasi and Asakani as they fought their way into what's now the Swat Valley of northern Pakistan. After a fierce siege, Alexander took the Asakanian capital of Massalia. According to legend, it was ruled by a beautiful queen, Cleophas, who bore Alexander a son and was allowed to keep her throne. The ruler of Taxila, near modern Islamabad, had formed an alliance with Alexander. Together, they marched to face Porus, king of Pauravas, at the Battle of the Hydaspes. It was Alexander's costliest battle, as Porus's war elephants inflicted terrible casualties amongst the Greeks. But despite Porus's fearless leadership, the battle ended in a decisive victory for Alexander, winning him control of the Punjab. Alexander wanted to push on into India to reach the Great River, which ancient Greek geographers said formed the edge of the world. But at the river Hyphasis, known today as the Bias, his army mutinied. His men had marched thousands of miles, fought countless battles, and not seen their homes in 8 years. They'd heard rumors of gigantic armies waiting for them in India. They refused to go any further. Alexander was furious, but had to turn the army around. He followed the rivers of the Punjab to the sea, a journey that took 10 months. On the way, he defeated the Malians, but while leading the assault on their camp, he was wounded in the chest, nearly killed. On reaching the coast, part of the army under Nearchus boarded ships and returned to Persia by sea, sailing through the Straits of Hormuz and entering the Persian Gulf. It was one of the great ancient voyages of exploration, as these waters had been previously unknown to Greeks. Meanwhile, Alexander led the rest of the army back by land through the Gedrosian Desert, today in southern Pakistan. But extreme heat and shortages of food and water led to terrible suffering and many deaths among his army. On his return to Persia, Alexander executed several of his viceroys and governors, men accused of ruling unjustly and robbing temples and tombs during his long absence in the east. At Susa, he arranged a magnificent mass marriage of Macedonian officers to 18 Persian noblewomen to strengthen bonds between his two kingdoms. Alexander himself married 2 Persian princesses. He also paid all his soldiers' debts and ordered 30,000 youths from across the empire to be trained in the Macedonian art of war. But at Opis, his Macedonian troops mutinied. They were offended by Alexander's apparent preference for Persian advisors and Persian ways. Alexander had the ringleaders executed and made a speech to the men reminding them of the glories they'd won together, leading eventually to an emotional reconciliation. At Ecbatana, Alexander's closest and most trusted friend, Hephaestion, died of fever. The king was grief-stricken, and days without eating. It ordered a period of public mourning across the empire. Alexander waged a successful campaign against the mountain raiders of Kossia, who not even the Persian kings had been able to subdue. Returning to Babylon, he was met by embassies from distant peoples, come to recognize his greatness. Ethiopians, Libyans, European Scythians, Lucanians, Etruscans, Gauls, and Iberians. Alexander's Bactrian wife, Roxana, was now pregnant. But as he planned his next campaign to Arabia and beyond, he developed a sudden fever and died days later, aged just 32. The cause of Alexander's death has never been established. It may have been malaria, cholera, typhus, or poison. Alexander died undefeated in battle. His reputation as a brilliant, fearless, and daring military commander remains undimmed. His decade-long campaign created one of the largest empires ever known, stretching from Greece to Pakistan. But it was vast and unstable, held together only by his own brilliance and name. Alexander left no plans for his succession, and his generals soon began fighting among themselves to carve out their own empires. In the wars of the successors, Alexander's widow Roxana and his young son were murdered. His own golden sarcophagus, en route to Macedonia for burial, was hijacked and ended up in Alexandria in Egypt. Today, its location remains one of the world's great unsolved mysteries. Few men have ever had such an impact on the course of history as Alexander the Great. The breathtaking achievements of his short life ushered in the Hellenistic age, as Greek ideas spread across the territory of his former empire, fusing with local traditions to trigger new developments in art, science, government, and language. Some of the successor kingdoms to his great empire were short-lived. Others endured for centuries. But all in turn would fall to new forces. And in the West, to the rising power of Rome. Research and artwork for This video comes from Osprey Publishing's extensive range of books on ancient history. Every Osprey book examines a particular battle, campaign, or combat unit in authoritative, meticulous detail. And with more than 3,000 titles, they cover everything from ancient warfare to modern conflict. Visit their website to see their online catalogue. Thank you to all the Patreon supporters who made this video possible, and to the channel Invicta